Pornography use among Christians, including pastors, has now surpassed the national average for Americans. Welcome to Freedom Alive. According to recently published research from the Barna Group and Pure Desire Ministries, 75% of Christian men and 40% of Christian women view pornography on some level. That's an 11% increase for men and 25% rise for women over the last 8 years. Nick Liberto was once caught in the snare of pornography and led a double life. Now Nick leads Proven Ministry and joins us to share his story as well as how this ministry is offering hope to others. I'm thankful to again be joined by our co-host, Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, it's evident the average Christian and many pastors are not experiencing freedom in this area. Tragically, the fact is that pornography use among Christians and in society is at a crisis level.
Well, you know, and this is a problem with churches in general, flying at a 30,000-foot level, as opposed to going down into the very day-to-day life that we live in and being afraid to address some of these things because they're sensitive. Abortion is one of those areas where oftentimes churches or pastors shy away from it because somebody might be offended, somebody might have had an abortion. Exactly, that's why you need to address it, and that you need to show what's right and wrong, but also hold out the hand of mercy and forgiveness. This is another area as well that we just bypass. And the problem with not addressing this issue within our congregations and churches in a way that is age appropriate is that there are people that are trapped because of different kinds of situations where they've seen things, they become addicted to pornography, and it affects their relationships, it affects how they view themselves, it affects how they react about others, because as in this case, living, so to speak, a double life, you know, pretending to be one person in one environment and then being another person in a different environment, that sort of weighs on you after a while. They need to be free, and the only way to be free is to address the issue. And so this ministry, Proven Ministries, is a great ministry. It's founded by one of my good friends, and it's a ministry that is designed to not only address the issue, but to set the captives free.
Amen. Amen. We cannot wait to bring this story to you. Our Freedom Alert is next.
The government should not intrude in a counselor's office. Liberty Counsel recently filed a brief urging the United States Supreme Court to review a case involving a Colorado law that violates the free speech of licensed counselors. Kaylee Childs is a licensed mental health counselor in Colorado who treats clients with issues related to gender confusion and sexual attraction. However, Colorado's law violates her free speech rights by preventing her from helping those who are struggling with gender confusion, same-sex attractions, and unwanted behaviors. The law authorizes fines up to $5,000 per violation and even revoking the counselor's license. Liberty Counsel recommends the High Court to take this case to resolve the harm counseling bans are having on the First Amendment rights of licensed counselors and their minor clients. Counselors and clients should be free from government censorship.
Up next, Matt's interview with Nick Liberto.
My very special guest is Nick Liberto. He is the executive director of Proven Ministries. We're going to be talking about a very important and also a sensitive topic. Proven Ministries was founded by my very good friend Joel Hesch, who is a professor of law at Liberty University School of Law. I had the pleasure of hiring him and working side by side with him when I served as dean of that law school. And he founded Proven Ministries. Welcome to Freedom Alive, Nick. We're looking forward to this topic, and I want to begin, first of all, with what Proven Ministries is, and then I want to move from that to your story. How did you get involved in this issue of helping people to overcome pornography?
Absolutely. Honored to be here, Matt. Yeah, so provenministries.org is our website, and we help individuals. We're seeking a revival of sexual integrity throughout the entire bride of Christ. And we do this by creating small group curriculum for men, for women, and for wives. And we now just launched a parents resource for helping parents begin the conversation as a preventative conversation. So Proven Ministries is all things sexual integrity for the family. And how I got into this was it's the only job interview you'll ever have where they expect you to have struggled with pornography. And, what a question in a job interview. And so for me, I'm a millennial. I remember the internet launching, the smartphone, free pornography, walking around everywhere in your pocket. So I, like most other millennials, was addicted at a very early age, was caught in the snares of something I didn't want to do, but continued to do. And so for me, it was something I wrestled with for the better part of 15 years of my life from a very young age. And so much of our culture, there was the purity movement, wearing the Pure Love Waits ring and things of that nature. But the internet was so new, most people didn't even realize people were watching pornography or it was accessible. Everybody thought it was a magazine you had to go buy at a convenience store. And it was everywhere. It was ubiquitous. And that was what ensnared me early on.
How old were you when you first began viewing pornography?
To be honest with you, I can't remember. I remember at an early age hiding Victoria's Secret magazines under my mattress. Maybe I was 9, maybe I was 10. I remember seeing hardcore pornography in a magazine for the first time when I was probably 13 and clipping those images out and carrying them with me. And like when the internet happened, and then I found that you could view online pornography for free with the click of a button, it was like gas just poured on that fire. And I didn't know who to talk to. It was so shameful and stigmatized. It was you want to keep this in isolation. You want to keep this a secret. You struggle in silence. You struggle in shame. And that is the cycle the enemy wants you to stay in. It's you're the only one. Only you struggle this way. When in reality, the data bears it out. We're all having experiences of struggles in the area of sexual integrity, specifically around pornography, and we can shine a light on this and what the gospel can do to free people.
So while this was going on with this struggle, were you attending church? Did you consider yourself a Christian? How did that play into your daily struggle and the tensions?
Yeah, to be honest, the answer is yes. I was attending church, serving in church, still considered myself a Christian. This is not a specific literal translation, but when we see Paul saying he does the thing he doesn't want to do and he doesn't do the thing he wants to do, right? Like I was resonating with a lot of that. So it was this white knuckling. Why do I keep doing this? I'm going to try and stop. I'm going to try really hard to stop. God doesn't want me to do this. But to be honest, I didn't have the tools. I just, was hearing, pray harder, try harder. I didn't have the accountability, the community, the transparency, the support. And so I was not set up for success, which is one of the motivations I have today, which is giving that support and creating that resolution for individuals that are struggling.
Well, a staggering report from the Barna Group and Pure Desire Ministries showed that 75% of Christian men, and I'm talking about Christian men, and also 45% of Christian women view pornography on some level. That's a staggering increase, 11% increase for men recently, and also a 25% rise in women over the last 8 years alone. So now that you're going through this, describe what does it do to you? What did it do to you? What did it do to your thinking? How did you live, I guess, essentially a double life?
Yes, and the terms are like higher levels of dopamine are produced when you're viewing pornography. So there are these neuropathways that get developed. There's addictive language around it, neuroplasticity and things of that nature. And so you want more. You want more extreme. You want it more often. It is not, you become desensitized more quickly. The human body becomes a commodity to be consumed. You're there for selfish pleasure, selfish gratification. So what it's doing, unfortunately, from very early ages in individuals, is it's rewiring their brains around all of the wrong things, not around connection, not around intimacy, not around God's truth, not around how we are to carry ourselves and treat our bodies as temples. It is hijacking our brains into just consuming bodies like pieces of meat.
Now, I know Dr. Judith Reisman, the late Dr. Judith Reisman, I know your founder, Joel Hesch, knew her from working at Liberty University School of Law. She did some research with a neurologist who said something very similar to what you said, that particularly with young people, before their brain is even fully developed in their early 20s, that when they view pornographic images, it actually creates a chemical brain change, basically almost like it brands it, imprints it into their brain, chemically speaking, and it's very hard to get those images out of their brain. So it has a more detrimental effect even with these young people. What's the average age that someone as young as, how young would they normally be to get exposed to pornography, and what does it do to them?
Yeah, that's the terrifying nature of this stuff. The current average age of exposure to hardcore pornography is anywhere from 8 years old to 10 years old. Wow. And we see that in our work because the amount of men or women that we're talking to, it's 15, 20 years of a struggle that started with a very early age of sexual abuse or sexual exposure. And to that point, their brains get hijacked, their palette of affection, of desire is warped, and it becomes this hyperfixation. And to be frank, they can't control it. They don't have the brakes in place in their brain at that age to learn how to say no to something like that. It'd be like giving a child heroin or cocaine and them, like they wouldn't know how to say no because they're a child. And so a lot of the realities today, unfortunately, are people who were exposed at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, and they've been fighting this struggle for decades. And a lot of our work addresses that. But the other exciting thing is we can have conversations with parents saying, hey, mom and dad, you got to have these conversations early and often, starting around the age of 6, because it's not if, but when your child's going to get exposed to this harmful content.
But it's so uncomfortable of a conversation. How does a parent, number one, start that conversation? I know you have resources on this. And how do churches address this in the congregation or with small groups?
Great question. So yes, we built thesextalk.com basically to give mom and dad all the tools they need, all the confidence they need to have these conversations. But what we say is you want to have conversations early and often, and you want to start with God's design. You want to start with how Adam and Eve were created. You want to start with where babies come from. You want to start with like God's design for marriage. And I think our culture has falsely gotten this idea that the sex talk is 2 hours of an awkward conversation driving in a car with one of your parents. And then check, I'm done as a parent. And that's not true. The sex talk should be 10 plus years of biblical based sex talks around God's design for sex and sexuality from the beginning ages of 6 or 7 years old. And yes, it will grow over time. And the thing with the churches, Matt, that's really cool with this is it allows you to have this preventative approach to say, we want to protect the innocence of our children. We want to give them a biblical understanding of sex and sexuality as designed by God. Because here's what we know. There's nothing that God has made that we shouldn't be able to talk about. But we also know the enemy wants to twist, warp, and lie And so he has taken sex and sexuality and said, Christians, you can't talk about that. It's taboo. It's hush hush. And what happens is we struggle in shame. We struggle in isolation. A 7-year-old gets exposed for the first time and doesn't know he can go talk to mom and dad. And then it becomes this cycle that goes, unfortunately, on for decades.
And so if you don't talk about it at home, and certainly if you don't talk about it in church, these young people are going to be exposed to it whether you like it or not. And they're going to be exposed to it in bad ways. And those ways are addictive, as you've mentioned. I know one of the things that I researched before, and Dr. Judith Reisman did this as well, and I'm sure you're doing this as well. What you said is that you become addicted to it. It becomes darker and darker. You wonder how, in fact, someone could be so horrible with this kind of sexual abuse against children. Well, they didn't start off that way. They were ultimately led in that direction because of this continual darkness, this degradation that happens over time.
Yes, it becomes this seed that gets planted that unfortunately grows and tears everything apart. We see pornography consumption as a major statistical component around divorce, with child abuse, right? Like there was always this initial seed planted of pornography, and then it's desensitized and it needs to be harder and more extreme. And now pornography today is abusive and demeaning. And again, what's happening is we as a culture are becoming desensitized to sex and sexuality, and we're basically given the enemy's view of sex and sexuality, and we need to redeem this space, and it needs to be God's view and what we see in Scripture and the Bible, and that's what we're about. Is if you have these early conversations with children, it's not if but when they're going to be exposed. So as a parent, your number one job is to prepare them for the day when it happens. Prepare them for the day.
You know, we had some of these statistics that we talk about. 75% of Christian men, 40% of Christian women have viewed pornography at some level. But that also includes pastors as well, unfortunately. So how do you reach out to pastors to address this issue? Because obviously pastors, they don't want to let other people know that they're dealing with struggles. They're helping other people, but yet they're sometimes dealing with their own struggles. And, you know, we've seen, unfortunately, some of these struggles reaching to the point where pastors actually committed suicide, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate because we've created a system where the pastor is expected to be perfect. And so our ministry has a resource for pastors. It's a confidential one-on-one. We'll walk through a struggle with a pastor to help to get them to freedom. But then equally, I would say churches should wholesale adopt a sexual integrity policy, small group practice, vulnerability. Pastors should have accountability partners regularly checking in on them, because here's what we do. We think a pastor is the best man of God I know. There's no way he could struggle with this. And the statistics don't bear this out. 57% of pastors and 64% of youth pastors currently have struggled with pornography. 14% of pastors are actively struggling. 21% of youth pastors are actively struggling. So it's false to assume that they're perfect. And we should instead assume that they're normal and human and have human struggles, yet we can support them and come around them with accountability, with support, with encouragement, and to create a reality where pastors know they have somebody to go say, hey, I'm struggling, I need help. Hey, I need, like, there's no reason we should ever assume someone's above this. This darkness reaches everyone, everywhere.
But what about somebody like yourself who's now gone down the road and they're involved in pornography at whatever age, and it's addictive and they can't get out, and they're having these guilt struggles? When they come to Proven Ministries, what resources do you provide for them?
Yes, we facilitate small groups all over the country. We have our Proven Men small group study, we have our Proven Women small group study, and we have our Proven Wives small group study. And so we literally have hundreds of people struggling every month, reaching out and saying, I'm in that boat, I need help, I'm alone, I'm isolated. And what do? We connect them in a small group in their church, a small group in their community. We help them have other people get around them, and they walk through our small group study together. It's a 12-week small group, and you need that accountability, you need that support. you need that James 1:5, confess your sins with one another and pray with one another so that you may be healed. And so we help individuals that are struggling find freedom through our proven curriculum.
So what are the signs that may be evident, say for a parent to a child, or maybe in a spousal relationship, that someone has a pornography problem that they need to therefore be able to talk about and help them overcome?
Yeah, so for a parent, signs are too much of a fixation on the human body, too much of a fixation on maybe sexually explicit areas in a television show. And to be honest, I would say don't even look for the signs. Assume your child will struggle with this. Don't even be on the lookout for signs, because you're such a great parent. You're on the proactive preventative approach. You're on the, we've already told them why our family looks different than the rest of the world. We've already told them why we don't watch these television shows. We've already explained to them, like, I can't even let my children watch Hulu commercials because of the amount of transgender LGBTQ plus identity stuff that's pushed. And so I have to have conversations with my 3-year-old of, that is people living in the world like we don't live, because God says that we live this way. And so, like, at an early age, you just have to have these conversations with your child. There's no one and done. There's early and often conversations around God's design for sex and sexuality. And the sextalk.com we built because this topic is too complicated for me to just say, go, best of luck, do it, you'll figure it out. Instead, we said, we did all the heavy lifting for you. Literally just use this video course and you'll be good to go.
Are those signs the same for, say, a spouse or adults?
Yes. So for a spouse and for adults, you know, you're looking for signs in your spouse or in a friend. They're isolated. They are really showing signs of withdrawal and or not connection. If you see someone who's by themselves and not regularly plugging in with community, I can almost guarantee you they're struggling in some way with, you know, pornography, poor sexual integrity in that way, because we're not designed to thrive in isolation. We're designed to be in community, in vibrant community in a local church.
Nick, where do we go from here, and how do you get this word out to churches? What kind of effort, how would you go about, if you're watching this program and you're a member of a church, how would somebody go about approaching their pastor, approaching their church leaders to bring Proven Ministries or some part of the program into their church?
Yeah, the really simple answer is go to provenministries.org and reach out to us and say, hey, I would like to get this in my church, because that's what we do for a living. We have a full-time staff and team that's all that we do. We talk to thousands of churches every week. And I have a parent who just emailed me saying they want to get the sextalk.com started in their church. And that's the conversation we're having right now. And so if you want to help, you know, invest in others, and, you know, you can donate on provenministries.org, but then you can equally say, my church needs to be doing something about this. And that's an important statistic to note, Matt, is that currently only 10% of churches in the United States has anything for sexual integrity like this for their people. And I want to see that go to 85%, 90%. Could you imagine if every church in the United States said, this is an important issue. We understand that our people and our children could struggle in this area, and this is our proactive, preventative solution. Let's turn this on now. It would change everything.
So churches could actually have the series that you have already created, the sextalk.com or sextalk series, which is preventative, but then also for other people who are already struggling in this area. You have these small groups, and those, I imagine, could also be on these churches on a regular basis, 12 weeks, and then with a break, and then maybe another 12 weeks for additional people or for others that need continuous support.
That is exactly correct. We call that a proven church, and that is a church that is plugged into our ministry, and we act like their bat phone for all things sexual integrity. Like, we are here to answer any and all questions. We'll come in and speak to the church. They're running proven men groups, proven women groups, proven wives groups, parents groups. And again, all that it is saying sexual integrity matters for our church. here's the resource and the ministry we're going to utilize.
It's such a critical thing because we're created in the image of God, and this really attacks the very image of God and destroys that human integrity that God ultimately designed us to have and to be the best in human relationships. And this completely attacks that. So find out, recognize that there's a problem, and then you have a solution to that problem, and then take proactive steps to prevent it and ultimately to set the captives free. Nick, what would you like to leave our listeners with? What kinds of things should they be looking for? What kind of words of hope can you leave our viewers with?
Yeah, I would say that together we can lock arms and see a revival of sexual integrity throughout the entire bride of Christ. We can live in a world where pastors are not regularly falling to sexual sin. We can create a world where our children's innocence is preserved utilizing resources like the sextalk.com. I think it's time for the evangelical community to say enough is enough. We need to be able to talk about this. We need to acknowledge that this is an issue, and we need to see and say that the gospel of Jesus Christ can redeem all of this. Let's shine a light in this space, and let's see that revival of sexual integrity throughout his bride.
And you certainly are an example of that as well as your founder, Joel Hesch. Thank you for being part of our program. Nick Liberto is the executive director of Proven Ministries, and your website is provenministries.org, provenministries.org. And you can get the preventative series, sextalk.com, sextalk.com.
TheSextalk.com.
TheSextalk.com. TheSextalk.com. And go to provenministries.org, and everything will be there. So thank you, Nick, for being a part of our program.
It's been an honor, Matt. Thank you so much.
Matt, for those at home, this issue is so much bigger than men and women. And listening to you and Nick talk, and Nick talking about hijacking brains in 6 and 7 and 8 and 9, 10-year-old kids, the magnitude of this is just amazing. Is it any secret that Satan is coming for our kids on so many levels?
Well, when you think about it with regards to children especially, and there's research actually on this, and Dr. Judith Reisman, as I mentioned, is one of the leaders on that. So she teamed up with a neuropsychiatrist to do some research on your brain and images, particularly pornography images that are seen as a young person, that it actually affects your brain, as I mentioned during the interview, in a different way than maybe an adult brain. So when those children are exposed to these pornographic images, and some of those are unintentional, some of them might be with another friend, and they have it on their phone, and they see those images, and they pass it around. It's not somebody seeking for that information and that image, but they get presented it, and now that becomes very addictive to them.
Freedom Alive, we want to bring you the truth about issues like this, real life issues that are impacting all of us, and also to give you great resources to where you can learn and be engaged with your family and lead your family in ways that will keep them safe. In closing, remember Proverbs 4, verse 23, which says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. So join us here next time, where you'll hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.